It was a quiet, small southern town where nothing bad ever happened. There were no unsolved murders, no home invasions. Stuff like that just didn't happen here. No, this was the type of place where fresh peach and sweet tea stands lined the streets. Neighbors knew each other by name. The 24/7 presence of gate guards left residents feeling at ease. Great Waters was the kind of place people escaped to feel safe. But in May 2014, everything changed. Now, a chilling murder mystery grips the community. Russell and Shirley Dermond, an older couple in their 80s who had lived in the community for years, were brutally murdered. The gruesomeness of the crimes sent shockwaves through the small town. With little to no evidence to go on and no clear motive, the case eventually went cold. Their killer or killers still roaming free. Who could be behind these heinous crimes? It's been 10 years this month and their case remains unsolved. Who killed the Dermonds? This is Avery After Dark and I'm your host, Avery Ross. It's so good to see you. I'm so glad you tuned in for today's episode. This is hands down one of the most mysterious cases we've covered here on Avery After Dark. And viewer discretion is advised because some of the details from this case are very disturbing. Here on the show, I'm really trying to focus more on unsolved cases, and this month it makes 10 years since the murders. We have a lot to go over today, so I hope you're ready. Before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast and leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Join the Patreon and share this show with your friends and family. Now it's time to get into today's mystery. Our story begins with a couple. Russell and Shirley Dermond were New Jersey natives. Russell served in the United States Navy during World War II. Russell and Shirley married in December 1950 and went on to have 4 children. 3 sons, Mark, Keith, and Bradley, and 1 daughter, Leslie. The family eventually moved to Atlanta, Georgia. There, Russell went into the fast food industry, owning several Hardee's locations in the Atlanta area. Shirley was a stay-at-home mom. The family really enjoyed living in Georgia. It was home. Their family grew and grew, Russell and Shirley eventually becoming grandparents to 9 grandchildren. In 1994, Russell left the fast food business and the couple retired, moving into a gated community called the Great Water Reynolds subdivision at Lake Oconee. This was about 12 miles northeast of Eatonton and 70 miles southwest of Atlanta. This new neighborhood was the ideal setup for retirement. It was very safe, quiet. The couple built a beautiful lakefront home at 147 Carolyn Drive. It was serene, surrounded by woods, and very private. This area was a vacation spot for many, and the couple's million-dollar home had its own dock. There were golf courses nearby. This was the type of place that people moved to escape the city life. It had that small southern town charm. Driving around, you'll see makeshift roadside signs for fresh peaches and sweet tea stands. Closer into the nearby town of Eatonton, there are farms, churches, and beautiful Victorian homes. In town, you'll find country-themed boutiques, cafes, and the local Piggly Wiggly. Russell Dermond kept himself busy with golf, reading, he loved taking walks, and spending time with his wife Shirley. But most of all, the couple loved spending time with family and friends. Their son Brad said his parents were total family people. Their favorite was spending time with their kids and grandkids. Shirley loved crossword puzzles, gardening, and playing bridge. They were active members at the local community church. This neighborhood was great for the couple as there were many others around their same age that they could socialize with. And that was important, as the Dermonds' children lived in Florida and North Carolina, so they weren't necessarily close by. But they still spent as much time as possible together. Every year, the couple's grandchildren would come visit for summer camp and spend time with Shirley and Russell. In 2000, tragedy struck when the couple's eldest son, Mark, was killed while attempting to purchase drugs in Atlanta. He was killed on his 47th birthday. Their son's killer was caught and apprehended, but his death left a lasting mark on the family, a huge loss. In May 2014, 88-year-old Russell and 87-year-old Shirley had been married for 68 years, and they lived a very peaceful life. On May 1st, Russell was seen running errands in nearby Eatonton. Around 2 p.m., he drove through the People's Bank and transferred money for an upcoming insurance expense. Around 2:30, he stopped at the grocery store Publix, picking up a prescription for Shirley, who was getting ready for an upcoming cataract surgery. It was a very standard grocery run. He picked up a loaf of bread and some cucumbers. Russell then drove back home. Both Shirley and Russell speak with their son Brad later that afternoon, casually chatting about their days. Shirley had spent her day at the art center playing bridge with some friends. Overall, a very normal day for the couple. On May 2nd, no one heard from Russell or Shirley. On Saturday, May 3rd, the Dermonds were supposed to attend a Kentucky Derby party at their neighbor's house. The couple hosting was named Huell and Peggy Wynn. Their friends were concerned when Russell and Shirley never showed up, and they were even more puzzled when days passed without any word from the couple. They didn't call to check in, give an excuse, or explain why they didn't show up. According to friends and family, Russell and Shirley were very polite and courteous, so it wasn't typical for them to blow off plans. Friends continued calling the couple, but there was no answer. Finally, on May 6th, no one had heard from the couple in days, so Huell and Peggy walked over to the Dermonds' house to check on them. Make sure they were okay. They were really worried at this point. The Wynns got to the Dermonds' house and see that their mailbox is full. Also, there's a newspaper lying in the driveway. Clearly, the couple had not collected their mail in days. Huell and Peggy then walk up to the house and find the door unlocked. They walk inside and call out, "Shirley, Russell," but there's no response. Now, given their age, Russell being 88 and Shirley being 87, an initial concern was the couple suffered an accident. Did they fall? Were they not able to get up? Huell and Peggy continue calling out, but the house is eerily quiet. They decide to go from room to room, and these neighbors were surprised to see the house looked immaculate. There were no signs of any accident. On the kitchen counter, they find Shirley's half-completed crossword puzzle from May 2nd with a pencil lying on top. They continue going from room to room, no sign of the couple. Then, one of the final places they check is the garage. This is where the Wynns make a horrific discovery. Lying on the ground in between the couple's vehicles was Russell's body, lying in a small pool of blood. He had been decapitated, and there were numerous towels surrounding his body. This appeared to be an attempt by the killer to prevent blood from leaking underneath the garage door. Huell and Peggy immediately dial 911, and police arrive on the scene. With them is Sheriff Howard Sills. Authorities get to the garage and see Russell's body, lying in between the couple's tan Lincoln and light blue Lexus. Just behind the Lincoln, Sheriff Sills finds a pool of blood on the garage floor, as if something had taken place in that area. They find Russell's hands are bruised and bloody. Sills sees, tangled within his wounds on his hand, were strands of Shirley's sandy white blonde hair. Police search all over the house and property, but Shirley is nowhere to be found. Also missing is Russell's head. Deputies initially believed that Shirley had been kidnapped, and given the scene, they were very concerned for her safety. Shirley's purse, cell phone, and car keys were inside the home, so the idea she ran off was unlikely. The FBI offers a $2,000 reward for Shirley. Soon after, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources launched a pontoon boat search of Lake Oconee. No one could think of anybody that would want to hurt this couple. Russell has been decapitated and Shirley has been kidnapped. Who would do this? Stuff like this just didn't happen in this community. No one knew what to think. Residents were horrified and scared. I mean, this was the first home invasion in this community in 18 years. With little to nothing to go on, investigators began to search the house. Although the scene in the garage was so gruesome, the inside of the couple's home was pristine. Investigators don't find any evidence of a struggle or forced entry. There was no foreign DNA found, no fingerprints. The items Russell had picked up from the grocery store were still sitting on the kitchen counter. The house seemed untouched. Investigators are also trying to determine how the killer or killers got to the house. But this was a gated community, so police assumed they would have surveillance. One of the first things investigators wanted to check on was that front gate. This neighborhood had a front entrance that was manned by security 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it also has CCTV. surveillance at all times, so investigators could see who entered and exited the neighborhood in the past week. And this could lead them straight to the killers. But shockingly, the CCTV surveillance had gone down during a storm a couple weeks before. So at the time of the crimes, it was not functioning, meaning there was no footage for police to look at. Along with this lack of CCTV, police weren't sure if their killer or killers entered through that front gate. The idea that they could have walked, snuck, or even arrived by boat was considered. The couple's house did sit on the lake, but hours turned to days with no sign of Shirley, until 10 days later, another gruesome discovery. On Friday, May 16th, two local men, Dennis Higgs and his friend Ronald, were out enjoying a leisurely afternoon fishing on Lake Oconee. Around 2:20 p.m., they spot something in the water. At first, they think it's a buoy, but as they get closer, they realize it's a body. They immediately call 911. Police get to the scene. They have finally located Shirley Dermond. Her 5'2" body was retrieved from the water by authorities. She was 5 miles from her home. Investigators find she had been weighed down by two 30-pound concrete blocks tied to her ankles. An autopsy revealed that Shirley had died from blunt force trauma, being hit 2 or 3 times with an object. Both Russell and Shirley had been brutally murdered. But who would target this couple? What is the motive here? Each of the Dermonds children were interviewed. Each one also voluntarily took polygraph tests and passed. The children all hoped investigators would track down their parents' killers. And they also had no clue, no idea who would do this to their parents, stating they had no enemies, no financial troubles, no involvement in any kind of crime. Investigators said there were no eyewitnesses who came forward with any sort of information. Based on his investigation, Sheriff Sills has narrowed the time frame of the crimes to somewhere between 4:30 p.m. on Friday, May 2nd, when the couple received their mail, to 4 p.m. on Saturday, May 3rd, when the couple didn't show up for the party. It's believed that they were murdered at some time on the 2nd of May. But when looking for a motive, investigators couldn't really find any. Nothing had been stolen from the home, and there were expensive valuables that any thief would have taken. Expensive watches, jewelry, electronics. So if this was a robbery, why wasn't anything stolen? This really throws investigators. Going back to the autopsies, the coroner did not find any evidence of trauma to Russell's body that would cause his death. And investigators believe that Russell was decapitated after he was already deceased. They found gunshot residue on Russell's shirt, so it's believed that Russell's death was caused by a gunshot wound to the head, and Sheriff Sills theorizes that he was decapitated after he was murdered in an attempt to hide evidence, the wound and the bullet. Sills also said the murders were likely committed at another site other than the couple's home, simply because of the lack of blood spatter at the house. Sills said, quote, "Miss Dermond, the injuries she sustained almost certainly should have left some physical evidence that wasn't present at the home. So, she might not have been murdered there, or neither he. All we know is that Mr. Dermond's head was removed there. There's physical evidence of that." End quote. Sills stated that this was not a random crime and does not appear to be a crime of opportunity. But investigators do believe this was the work of an amateur. They theorize this because if the killer did decapitate Russell because they were afraid the gun would be tied back to the killer, this would clearly not be the work of some kind of professional hit. Also, they didn't believe a professional hit would entail leaving one body at one location and the other in the lake with blocks. Additionally, the attempt to weigh Shirley's body down with those blocks really stuck out to police. Investigators believed a professional would know this would not work. A decomposing body will rise to the surface eventually, and a few cinder blocks would not prevent this. As the family waited for any type of movement in the case, Keith Dermond, the couple's son, did a TV interview and said he believed his parents could have been killed by a cult because of the decapitation, questioning, was this ritualistic? Something else that was considered. Was this connected to their son's murder in Atlanta so many years ago? A drug dealer seeking revenge. Investigators looked into this, but stated they do not believe the two cases are connected, not finding any links between them. Officially, police said they believe they are searching for multiple killers, more than one, and they believe the motive was robbery, although nothing was taken. Nothing about this case makes any sense, and months pass by with no movement. That next year, in May 2015, it came out that a mystery man was spotted on the Dermonds property around the time of the murders. Not much was revealed about this man, only that Sheriff Sills interviewed him, but no arrest was made. Investigators looked into hundreds of leads and a variety of different motives, but the Putnam County Sheriff's Office have never found anything concrete. As the years passed, the case grew cold. But new evidence in this mystery could break the case wide open. Sheriff Howard Sills says that this is one case he thinks about every day, and said that his office has received new data, specifically cell phone data. From here, he said they reached out to the FBI for help in combing through the evidence, and is hoping that their analysis could help finally track down the killers. Sills said, quote, "Just last week I received some data, primarily cell phone data, that we have been waiting on for some time. That data was downloaded onto a program the FBI has, and they are assisting us in analyzing the data now. The technology we are using was not in existence back in 2014. I don't want to create the impression that I've acquired some silver bullet, but this is yet another tool we are using trying to find out who perpetrated these heinous crimes. What we need more than anything is for someone to call us and tell us who is responsible for this savagery." End quote. In May 2023, there was news about possible DNA that was discovered, and investigators hope this DNA may lead to a break in the case as well. But there was a question if there was enough of the DNA to run through CODIS, or if it belongs to the killer. Sheriff Sills said, "We have some potential DNA that may or may not be identifiable, and it still could be the Dermonds." Sadly, Russell's head has never been found, and his cause of death remains unknown. And these murders have haunted this small town for a decade. This month, it makes 10 years since the killings. This case is the only unsolved case in Sheriff Sills' 21 years in the role. This is one case he is at a loss over. So let's get into some of the theories in this case because there are quite a few. One angle Sills was working on at one point in 2014 was that Russell and Shirley were murdered after a botched robbery extortion, in which the Dermonds were unable to deliver the money or valuables demanded of them. A robbery gone wrong. It's possible that Shirley was taken for ransom, and when Russell couldn't pay, they killed him. And again, nothing in the home was stolen. So the motive was robbery, but then the thieves didn't take anything? Unless the killers were after something else, I don't even know what that would be, but the robbery angle seems to be the one that investigators have somewhat landed on. Another idea was, could this be a disgruntled employee? Russell owned dozens of Hardee's restaurants in Atlanta, and it seemed like whoever the killers were, they knew the couple. So the idea that a former employee with some kind of grudge could be involved? I also find this a bit far-fetched because Russell retired in 1994. So to make this theory fit, you'd have to believe that this disgruntled employee waited 20 years to get revenge, held out until Russell was almost 90 years old, and then again didn't steal anything. I'm pretty open-minded, but that seems a bit unlikely. Also, there is no real evidence that points to one certain employee that was angry with Russell. There were no major disputes between him and any former work associates. Another theory that's been discussed is, was this a case of mistaken identity? Was another couple living in that neighborhood the actual targets? This could explain how this case just makes no sense, like something is missing. Why this sweet older couple, grandparents, were targeted out of the blue? Investigators also considered something more personal. Was anything going on with the couple? Were there marital issues? Fighting? Along with their children saying nothing was out of the ordinary with their parents leading up to their deaths. Through investigations, detectives found no evidence of any discord or issues between Russell and Shirley, or any signs of any kind of mental or physical illnesses. Okay then, what about their finances? According to Sheriff Sills, investigators looked through 80 years worth of the couple's financial records with a fine-tooth comb. They went back to the beginning of their marriage, trying to find anything to make sense of this. And he said they found absolutely nothing. Sills saying that their finances were remarkably routine. One of the most widely discussed theories was that a family member was involved, or the Dermonds killed by someone they knew. The murders appear to be so personal. That, along with no signs of forced entry, some investigators find it likely that Russell and Shirley did know their killers, or were at least familiar with them. And there were no signs of forced entry because the couple knew them. But as we covered, the couple's children were interviewed, polygraphed, and detectives could find nothing connecting any family member with the murders. One angle I didn't find any reporting on was if the couple had any work being done on their house leading up to the murders. Russell and Shirley were in their late 80s, so I imagine they would be hiring out for big jobs. Things like painting, tree trimming, roofing work, you name it. I'd be really curious if the couple had hired anyone, workers, in those months before they were murdered. I always think of Mindhunter, the case where detectives Holden Ford and Bill Tinch are investigating the murder of a young 12-year-old victim in the South. This was back in the 70s, and they ended up tying it back to a tree trimmer, a man who had been working around the victim's house. He targeted and murdered this young girl. Or the Elizabeth Smart case. She was abducted by a man who had briefly done work at her family's home. So it's a question of who was around the couple in those months leading up to the killings. Was someone brought in to work on the Dermonds' home? This individual could have seen that they were wealthier and older. Or was it possible someone spotted Russell in town that last day he was seen, targeted him, and followed him home? I'm just brainstorming here. As you can imagine and have heard, there have been many theories about this case. But there is a lack of evidence in every direction you turn. Sheriff Sills says that he wishes that 911 wasn't called so many days after their murders. This gave investigators a very late start. Shirley and Russell's son Brad said hopefully keeping his parents' case out there will break someone's silence and uncover a clue as to who murdered his parents. Brad went on to say that his parents were at that age, that stage of life, that he had prepared for a call of their passing, but not the type of call he received, that his dad had been murdered and his mom was missing. Brad said his family doesn't even know how Russell died because, quote, "we don't have his head," end quote. He also believes the fact that his mom's hair was found in his father's hand wound indicates his dad was trying to protect his mom in their final moments together. Brad said that his father often visits him in his dreams, saying that his dad will offer clues about his death, what happened. But Brad says every time he wakes up before he can see anything. Brad said, quote, "somebody's out there and they're living in hell. There's such a thing of God's wrath. So if somebody does know something, they had the responsibility of coming forward, even if it's just a shred of information." Around town, faded reward flyers are still hung up with information on the case and a photo of Russell in a suit and Shirley in her pearls. The couple is smiling. Underneath, there's a reward for information directly leading to the arrest and prosecution of their killers. A total of $25,000 is now being offered for anyone who can provide information that can lead to an arrest or conviction. To this day, the motive behind these brutal killings is still a mystery, and the killers are still out there. Anyone with any relevant information on the Dermonds case is urged to contact the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557. I read through so many articles and online discussions about these murders, and one phrase I saw again and again was, "this case doesn't make any sense." And it really doesn't. But someone out there knows something, and I hope for the Dermonds and their family's sake, the killers are identified and Russell and Shirley and their loved ones receive justice. It's so important to keep a spotlight on unsolved cases, as that's how they get solved. Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments here on YouTube. I always really appreciate hearing your take on these cases. You all have some really great detective brains. I read your comments and I'm like, whoa, I didn't even think of that. Thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode. I'm always so happy to be a part of your day. Next episode, I've got even more mystery coming your way. Until then, I'm Avery Ross, and this is Avery After Dark.